Sheila, we were so pleased to be able to ask you to come here. As I mentioned at the beginning, one of the pieces of feedback that we got about the programming at the Institute was things that would be resources or opportunities for women to connect across points in their transitions in their lives and their careers. And when we thought about topics for this, one of the first ones that came up was financial security. So can you tell us a little bit about how finances is something that we should be highlighting when we think about transitions? How does finance play into that?
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm delighted to be here tonight, and what I'm hoping to do is just give, just nuggets, and if you all leave here perhaps with one nugget that you take away, I'll view it as a success. But transitions is such an interesting topic because we all go through so many transitions in our lives, and your financial life plays into really every transition. And so for the students in the room, many of you are leaving home for the first time, coming to school. You're probably given or an allowance, or you've worked over the summer and have money that you have to budget throughout the year. Your first introduction perhaps to finance, and many of you have taken on student debt. And that's a whole nother financial responsibility. And so then as you move through your life and you perhaps get married or find a life partner that you want to live with or marry, and that's a whole nother set of financial issues. How are you going to combine your finances? And then as time goes on and you have a family, a whole nother set of financial issues surrounding childcare. Will somebody stay home? Will you both work? How does that play out? And then as time goes on, unfortunately, we know statistics tell us that 50% of marriages end in divorce, and that creates a whole nother set of financial issues. And then, women live longer than men, and so women will have to manage their own finances, when they lose a spouse. So my message to all of you is that if you really have and start early and have a good sense of your finances, it will make these transitions much easier. Because the financial aspect of the transition is one piece, and there are so many other emotional pieces. But at least if you know you have some kind of control over that financial piece, I think the transitions through life will be much smoother.
Mm. And even if you haven't started early, it's no better time to start than now, right?
If you haven't started, when you leave this room, start. It's never too late to start. And I encourage everybody to, if you haven't started, tomorrow's a new day.
Mm-hmm. Or tonight even.
Sure, tonight.
So speaking of transitions and change, you've been working with ultra high net worth clients for 30-some years. How have you seen the makeup of your clientele change? Because a lot has changed in our society.
Right. So when I started 30 plus years ago, I would say 98% of my clients were men. I don't and still do deal in the ultra high net worth client space, and it was just all men. And I said I had great experience in dealing with men. I have boys. I'm an only child. My father, my husband. I was, very well equipped to work with men. But over time, women started becoming kind of a more important part of my client base. Women have, launched careers. They become entrepreneurs. They become successful in their own right. But they've also inherited wealth. Women have inherited wealth from their parents. And as I said, women live longer than men, so they've inherited money from their husbands. And, there's the divorce component. They get divorce settlements and have to manage their own money. So I would say, it's not 50-50 for me and my client base now, but it's moving in that direction. And women, I see women handle money in all different ways through my client base. And it's about adapting, educating, and understanding how women want to be communicated with. So, yeah.
And speaking of communications and women, maybe it's because we're newer into having more wealth or the roles that we've taken, but women are often not comfortable talking about money. And you've seen some of the statistics that are on your tables about our comfort with these things, but not talking about it is actually to our detriment, right? Because we think we're being polite, you don't talk about money, but
Yeah.
this is actually something that's harming us. So what do we need to be talking about?
Right. So I was always raised that it wasn't polite to talk about money, and I know a lot of my contemporaries were raised that way. And even today, I think some of my friends who have all daughters, as a very specific friend, they ask their daughters kind of what they could have done differently. And one of the things that their daughters had said to them was, well, you really didn't talk to us about money. So I think it's really important to start that dialogue with your children early. Get them involved in, how to manage even a small pot of money. Just have that dialogue, because I think it's really, really important.
Right. So let's talk about how when women do even talk about money, they tend to not retain the responsibility for it. When you and I had first talked about this, you said, something that's so close to my heart is women abdicating financial responsibility to their partners or to their parents or somebody else in their life.
Right.
What's going on with that?
Well, so women do tend to abdicate. They abdicate to their fathers, to their husbands, to their son-in-laws, to their sons, to their brothers. And I've experienced all of that personally. And so I'm a tremendous advocate for women taking on this responsibility themselves, or at least really engaging in it. Because I will tell you a secret. It's not rocket science. It's really not. People like to, particularly people in the financial community perhaps, like to mystify it a little bit. But there really is no mystery, and if you set your mind to it, you are very capable of doing it, and you should have a lot of confidence in doing it, because there's a lot of research out there that says women that do take on their investing, with help, they tend to be longer-term thinkers. They don't trade as much, and over time can have better financial results because of their temperament and the way they behave, their behavioral kind of finance. But there's one story I want to share because I think it's so important. A woman that I worked with years ago, she got a very hefty divorce settlement from her hedge fund husband, and she had wanted nothing to do with money. I mean, she didn't know anything about it. She was much more into the arts. And I worked with her when I was, let's say 20 years ago when I was younger, but she left such an impact on me because quarterly, no matter what, she met with her financial advisor, her lawyer, and her accountant. And we would go see her, and we would sit in her living room. We would go through her investment portfolio. We would go through her expenses. And in the beginning, she was like, oh, stupid question, stupid question, stupid question. It's like, there are no stupid questions. But, she did that over a long period of time. And guess what? When you do that and you dedicate that kind of time to it, you gain a lot of knowledge. And so she was extremely deliberate about it. And I always admired it because I always knew it was probably worse than going to the dentist for her, right?
Right. And I think, though, that we have this impression that was our moms or our grandmothers or whatever. Are millennials different in how they approach this? Or?
So actually, UBS did a study, and there's a copy of it on your tables. But the shocking truth is that, of the study that we conducted, actually boomer women are more engaged in financial management than millennial women. Millennial women are less likely to manage their own finances, and they know they have to do something about it, but they're still less likely. And they, anecdotally, I've talked to a few millennial women about it, and I think they feel as though kind of they have been coddled and taken care of, and everybody's gotten a trophy, and kind of the way things have progressed, and they kind of feel like somebody will just keep taking care of them. And it's a broad statement, right? Everybody's different, but it's interesting because it's not what I expected. I would have expected the opposite. So millennial women really have the tremendous opportunity to step up now, and because there's so much information out there. Yeah.
Well, and speaking of information, in UBS's study, they mentioned the top 5 myths that are in play when we think about women and finance. So what are some of those things that are out there?
So I have to put my glasses on for this. So the top 5 myths are that women share financial decisions equally. Not true. That women have been on equal ground for a very long time. Not true. Millennials view it as my mother's problem. Not true. I'm unhappy with the disparity, and I'm advocating for change. I think we'd rather see, I think for it to change, women have to take ownership of it. And so if you're not taking ownership of it, how are you advocating for change? It starts at home. It starts with yourself. And the fifth one's kind of interesting, is that the breadwinner takes the lead on financial decisions. So in our study, 43% of women who are breadwinners defer to their husbands, spouses, to take charge of their finances. They don't own it, they don't take charge of it, which I thought was interesting.
Right, so even though they're bringing in the money.
Money.
They're still abdicating the
Yeah.
caretaking of it to somebody else.
Right.
So I'm going to ask for a little bit of a shift here, because you work with ultra high net worth clients.
Mm-hmm.
And although there may be some of us here, a lot of us aren't ultra high net worth yet, right? So, but is it still important for people who don't necessarily think of themselves as high net worth to be doing this too? And
it's almost more important, right? It's almost more important. There are a lot of different tools out there. So if you are, a real do-it-yourselfer, you can get on a lot of these financial platforms. There's a lot of tools available to you to help you figure out, your expenses, your income, what you can save, and how that pattern over time, what that'll look like in 20 years, and will you have enough to retire? So I encourage you, if you are a do-it-yourselfer, go on and start playing with some of these platforms. And if you are one that likes kind of one-on-one interaction, find a financial advisor and sit down and talk with them about your situation. And, the financial plan is the most important piece, right? I have actually seen people of all wealth levels overspend and really put their financial future in jeopardy. So it really doesn't matter how much money you have. You'd be amazed what people can spend. So you really need to make sure that your spending is in line with what you can afford to secure your financial future. And that's key. I mean, you can get good investment returns, you can get all that, but if you are outspending your money, that's the worst place you can be.
Right. And one of the resources that we put on your tables is a list of some of those places that you can go online. Some of them are nonprofit based. Some of them are specific to different service providers. And there's a budgeting sheet on some of the tables that selected that topic. So there are some good resources that we've already primed you with there.
Right, and it gives you power. If you kind of have this all laid out, you're in a much more powerful position than kind of keeping your head in the sand. And, I always say that, hoping it's going to work out is not a plan. It's not a strategy, right? You need a plan. You can't hope for it and have it happen.
So part of what we know we want to do this evening is have the people at the tables who have been intentionally sat with women who have more experience life-wise, even if they don't have expertise, women who may be just starting out, so students, women who may be and men who may be in roles where they can provide some advice, et cetera. What are the sorts of questions they should be asking? So let's start with the young women first. What sorts of questions should they be asking to prepare themselves on that path?
Right. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my glasses and my notes so I can read you some. But for young women, really, how much debt do I have? What's my plan for paying off debt and saving for the future? What are my sources of income? I know that it's really kind of a millennial thing to have a job and a few side hustles, and you need to take all those little income, all those buckets of income into consideration when you're thinking about what your income looks like. And if this is, I think, so important, if I'm in a serious relationship, how much debt does my significant other have? What does my significant other's credit score look like? And that's another thing, you should all know what your credit score is. These can be really hard conversations, but it can really impact your life together and how you apply for a mortgage, car loan, so you really want to have a sense for what your significant other's finances look like. And it can also, give you a heads up that maybe they do spend too much, and maybe this is something you have to address early, and how will you share expenses? So I think those are really important topics for.
And if I'm correct, that's one of the things that couples fight the most about, right?
Right.
So finances is one of the biggest sources of tension in relationships.
Right. Maybe we can reduce the divorce rate if women take a more
Everybody
active role in their
comes to a
finances,
transitions event.
right? Exactly.
So how about women who are married
Right.
And thinking of leaving the workforce? Because that's another thing that we heard a lot. Women, for a number of reasons, not just children, maybe wanting to take some time out of the workforce for caregiving responsibilities. That could be an elder, a parent, or somebody in their family. It could be that they want to have children. What should they be asking for that? Is there any way to prepare for that?
Well, that's a really interesting topic, because I think that women can fall into a pattern where they've had a career, they have money of their own, and then all of a sudden they're not earning any money. And their spouse, are, the savings and the investment dollars going into your spouse's account? Are they going into a joint account? Are you getting some of that money on a regular basis to be put aside for you in your own name? So I think these are all like discussions that you have to have, because when you've been independent and working for a while, how are you going to feel if for every little thing you have to talk to your spouse if you want, a new pair of shoes, or you want, it's just, I think that can be the source of, unhappiness if you all of a sudden feel as though your independence is taken away, because, financial independence is a really powerful thing. So I'm just looking. And the other thing is, do you have enough money to maintain your lifestyle if something were to happen to your spouse? And I know that because I have a friend who, she was in investment banking. She left her job to take care of their 2 children. Her husband was a young partner at a law firm, 40 years old. He's diagnosed with cancer. And they realized that they did not have enough life insurance. Unfortunately, the partnership was able to do something across the board for all the partners. They kind of lifted all boats. But it was a horrible time for her to realize that they didn't have enough life insurance, and that they didn't have enough disability insurance to carry them through. And it was a real wake-up call for her. And there was no getting more insurance at that point, really, for them personally. So, as you go through these transitions, like when you have kids, that's the perfect time to start thinking about that. So really make sure you know how much you would need in life insurance to be able to carry on your life for X number of years until you have to go back to work or whatever it may be. There's no right or wrong answer. It's just be informed and make informed decisions.
So this next one is a tough one, because I think it's one nobody wants to think about, right? Because when we enter into what we consider a lifelong partnership, you think it's lifelong. It's never going to change, right? But in reality, as you said, we know that things do change. Mm-hmm. So divorce may be something that happens, whether we like it or not. So how about women who are in those sorts of situations? What sort of questions should they be asking?
Right. So I think that, it's interesting, because there is a trend that women in their 50s, after the kids have left the house and they're kind of sitting there and thinking about their next 30 years, women are actually, filing for divorce at a high rate. And so I think that really you have to understand the financial ramifications of that before you kind of jump the gun on it. So I would think that you would want to do a lot of preparation to really understand the financial ramifications of that. And how are you going to live post-divorce, and what are the resources that you're going to have access to support your lifestyle post-divorce. And every state is different in terms of their divorce laws, but in the research that I've done, most judges are not looking to maintain women in the lifestyle that they had if they weren't working. They're looking to say, okay, you need to go back into the workforce, and how much can you make back in the workforce? So I think that's a really
Challenging.
challenging and interesting topic, because if you've given up your career to have children and you've been out of the workforce for 15 years, you know, it can be a struggle to find the right situation.
Yeah. Excuse me. The last is another sad one, then we'll turn to a better one in a second.
Yeah.
But how about women who are recently widowed?
So women who are recently widowed, I think, really need to make sure that they have the right team of advisors around them. That includes the right accountant, the right financial advisor, or the right attorney. And, you know, again, set the plan in place. Do the financial plan so that you know what your financial resources are. You need to set up, like you set up your regular doctor's appointments, you need to set up appointments with your financial advisor a few times a year. You know, as the woman I described earlier who was divorced, you just need to have that discipline so that you're not surprised. And I'm going to tell you a story that actually shocked me. I was sitting on a plane next to this lovely woman who was in her early 70s, and she was a psychologist. And we were talking about money, and she had been recently widowed, maybe 3-4 years, and her financial advisors were in a different state, and she talked to them occasionally, and so we got into this conversation. She said, I really hate to tell you this, but I haven't opened one of my investment statements in 2 years. And I was like shocked. I said, you haven't opened your statements? No. I said, well, how do you know you're not going to run out of money? She said, oh, I have plenty of money. I'm not going to run out of money. It's like, wow. I said, okay, well, I said, you have to promise me when you get off the plane, you're going to open these statements. And she was like, well, I don't even know what to look at. And I said, well, just start by looking at the bottom line. You know, look at December's bottom line, then look at January's bottom line, then look at, you know, and just see, is there a progression, you know, see what the progression is, because, you know, not only can people be, you know, stealing money from you, or they could have put you in bad investments. And, you know, by the way, let's just even talk about what fees you're paying. If you haven't opened your statements in 2 years, you have no idea what kind of fees you're paying. So it was a really shocking conversation with a very well-educated woman who was a psychologist. So
She abdicated her responsibility to her, not even to the professionals, not even to her partner.
exactly, yeah. She really trusted them.
So you keep talking about a financial advisor, which I think, you know, some of us are like, okay, that's great, I have one, or I think I can access one. But where if you don't have one or don't know about this, where would I get one? Especially if I'm not an ultra high net worth person, right?
Right. Well, I mean, I think you can start by asking friends. You can ask accountants. You can ask your attorney. There are organizations that you can go to. I think it's the Organization of Certified Financial Planners that will give you a list in your area. And you can go online and you can check the credentials of these people. And if you're a do-it-yourselfer, and there's nothing wrong with being a do-it-yourselfer, it's more work, and you can use one of these platforms. Yeah. So there's a lot of resources out there, but make sure you also interview a few different people, and make sure that you have a connection. Make sure they're not talking over your head. This is not that hard, and you know, sometimes there's that intimidation factor that advisors want to portray, you know, their intelligence and they're so smart, and they want to talk over your head. So if you don't understand something and they can't explain it to you, you're in the wrong place, because it's just not that hard.
And I do know, too, that even some employers with their retirement benefit, so for example, if you have TIA, CREF, which
Right.
a lot of faculty staff here do, then they offer financial advising services as a part of that benefit. Right. So you don't even need to look sometimes outside of
Right.
your own benefits through your employer if you have that. So.
Yeah, and take advantage of it. It's there for you to take advantage of. So definitely, you know, the reality is we just have to own it. It's all there for us to own, and we just can't be intimidated by it. We have to be empowered to own it, and that's, you know, that's my big message.
So this is kind of a little bit of a different question than what you and I have talked about before, but I see there are some men in the audience. What should men be doing in this situation? Because if we're abdicating responsibility for men, what should they be doing?
Well, bring your spouse's significant others into the conversation. Bring them to the meetings, and make sure that the financial advisor is talking to both of you. Have conversation, a few times a year or once a quarter, sit down and review things. There's a traditional division of responsibility. It's not in everyone's house, but a lot of times the women are responsible for the bills and the men take care of the investments. And that's fine. You can have that division of responsibility, but just, once a quarter or twice a year, sit down and review it with each other. Review the expenses with your spouse. I have to tell you, with my spouse, after 25 years of paying the bills, I was like, I'm done. You take on this. I have had it. Because it's a big job. And so, men need to understand what the expenses are and what it costs to run the house as much as you need to understand what the investments look like and the insurance policies and who the advisors are. So it's definitely a two-way street.
That's great. So parting advice before we open it up to questions from the audience.
Feel great about your financial future. Own your financial future. And if you aren't taking ownership of it now, leave here and start tomorrow.
That's what we're going to task you all with
Start
doing.
tomorrow. Okay, start tonight. Start after dessert.
Great. Okay, well, thank you, Sheila. This is really fabulous. So now before we go into the mentoring circles, and I have Sheila come up and talk about that, I'd like to give you an opportunity to ask Sheila a couple of questions. So I know there are microphones out in the audience, so look for Danielle, raise your hand if you have something that you'd like to ask. I see one over here. Oh, okay, I got one in the back first.
Is there such thing as bad debt or good debt? Yeah, good debt.
Yeah, there are definitely positive uses of debt. And so, what you don't want to get into, right, is building super high credit card bills when you're getting charged 15 or 20%. But, if you want to buy a home with a mortgage that's within your, budget, that's a great kind of debt, right? And interest rates are still, really reasonably low. So, that can be, a positive kind of debt. So definitely, you have to look at the cost of the debt, and, the home is hopefully an asset over time that will appreciate, although we've had some ups and downs in that the last 10 years. But there's definitely reasonable kinds of debt to take on.
So debt, usually that has structured payments, right, versus
Structured
revolving
payments.
credit, and debt that gets you further in an asset versus depreciates quickly, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. I have one more, and then we'll go to you.
So I've heard that, if your company is matching your 403B, I've heard different things about whether you should put as much money as your company is matching or put more. Like, I've heard that, if you should put only what your company is matching and then take the rest of the money and put it maybe in a Roth IRA or in investments. What's your take on matching funds, and if you should put only what is matched or do more?
Right. That's a difficult question for me to answer because I think it's a bit specific to the individual, and I will confess I'm not an expert in that area. So I would kind of seek advice, unless, Terry, you have something to say on that topic.
I don't know enough about that, but except that I do know that I've been told, and this is where I think the mentoring circles comes into play, is hearing and talking through these discussions, that getting as much as you can into retirement
is a good thing.
Right, unless you're bumping up against tax benefits, like losing the tax benefit of putting it in there.
Right. And if you want to email me your question, I will find an answer for you and get back to you. I just don't know off the top of my head.
Okay, I know you've had your hand up.
All right, I'm totally going to out myself as not knowing a lot right now. So I'm
There
an
are
associate
no bad
professor here.
questions.
But I grew up working class, and so we didn't, investing was like a foreign language. And I have been thinking about having a financial planner for a long time, but I don't even know like how much they cost, right? So like, can you get financial planning services, a dedicated financial planner, without it costing you a lot?
You know, I think that every firm is different, but I think that a reasonable number to think is maybe 1% of your assets. They would manage your assets, they would, you know, provide you with financial planning advice. But, you know, you've got to interview people and, you know, specific to your situation and find out what they cost. And we haven't talked about costs, but costs should be extremely transparent. There's no reason why they shouldn't be completely transparent, so.
So even when you're setting up the meeting, they should be able to tell you what their fees would be
Yeah,
right off the bat.
exactly, right off the bat.
And if you're not, I see Shauna saying it's similar situation, okay, I have no assets.
Yeah,
So
well, you took the words out of my mouth,
1%,
yes.
you know, that's great, it's.
Yeah.
What's
But
1% of nothing?
I do know, so. I do know, though, that you probably are a part of TIA CREF, right? So they have financial planning. That's a good free, quote unquote, free place to start. And that would be a good opportunity to look into that. And then, as Sheila said, if you're not comfortable with that situation, then you kind of branch out and go to one of those websites to find out where they are. But definitely finding out fees up front. And I do think that it's much more accessible. You don't have to have the money there. You don't have to stand in front of a financial planner and say, well, I can offer you $1 million to invest immediately, right? I
Right.
mean, financial planners are there for all levels of wealth.
Right, and some
or lack
financial
thereof.
planners will charge a fee for service, so it won't necessarily be a percentage of assets. So,
Mic on? Okay. So the markets have been pretty volatile recently, and with that, you know, there becomes some emotional investing that we see. I think women tend to get the impression of being risk adverse. Is there any advice you have for women who are investing for the very first time, don't know what they're doing, and might emotionally be listening to the news, how they can cut out that market noise?
right. There is so much noise in the news around investing. You hear one day the market's up a lot, the next day the market's down a lot, and I think that does put a lot of women off. And so that's why, you know, setting a financial plan, putting money away in an asset allocation on a very regular basis, so you're averaging into the market over time, is extremely important. One of the huge risks for women is that they don't take enough risk in their portfolios. So in other words, they have way too much in bonds, not enough in equities. Equities are really the growth engine of your portfolio, and you need to have some kind of balance. But if you're young, you should have a high percentage of your assets in equities. Now, you have to have an emergency fund and so forth set up so that, you know, you don't want to, you know, put money you're going to need within a short time period into the equity market. But for your long-term investing, you want to have money in the equity market so the money can grow as the economy grows.
I just want to make a note that Sheila and I and others have been using terms, right? There is a glossary of terms, of financial terms on your sheet that one of our committee members, Carrie Walker, put together. So you have a way to, okay, what's an equity, right? Like, except I know it as, you know, gender equity, but this is a different thing when we talk about it in finance. So those terms are in there so you don't feel like you don't know what people are talking about. Okay, I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. So.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Weiss. I work out of the business school here in the graduate business programs. I have a question around funds that are directed towards women investors and around women investors. And just wondering your perspective on the context of the history of that practice and your thoughts around the future of that. And should we as women, you know, be seriously considering that, and how do we get access to those funds?
So I think you're talking about gender lens investing, and gender lens investing is definitely very kind of up and coming field. And so what I would suggest is that whenever you look at any kind of fund to invest with like that, you want to look at the track record, you want to look at the risk, you want to look at the fees. You want to treat that investment as any other investment. You shouldn't invest, per se in a gender lens fund to support women if it isn't going to be providing you with the kind of returns that you need. Now, you can do that with perhaps a small portion of money and think about it in a different way. There's a whole trend around sustainable investing too. And sustainable investing is really interesting because sustainable investing is positioned to potentially provide outsized returns, right? Because these companies are acting in the right way, doing the right things, and it should really drive their business. And gender equity among those companies, it's one of the key measures. So just food for thought on both of those.
Would that be in the same category as responsible investing? No?
I think
I'm throwing around my ignorance as well.
Right, the sustainable investing is really kind of more of a field. And so I think it's, for example, if you have an oil company and you look, the analysts look and say, well, what is this oil company's safety record? Well, if they don't have a very good safety record, that's potentially going to be an expensive venture for them, and their returns probably won't be as good as a company that has a really strong safety record. So that would be kind of considered a company that might wind up in a sustainable investment portfolio. So, there's a lot of information, I think, on the internet about sustainable investing, and if anybody's particularly interested in it, I can certainly send you information on sustainable investing and gender lens investing. I'm happy to send you some pieces on that as well.
Great. All right, we have.
As a young adult, I'm often hearing start investing, take advantage of all these years you have. But what would be your advice for a college student or a young adult, like how to invest now and get started?
So how to invest now? For money that you're going to put away and save for the long term, you want to probably start with index funds. You want to be invested in equity index funds so that you're very well diversified and you can get the appreciation in the market that the market gives you. And over time, as you gain more assets, you can perhaps invest in companies or kind of broaden your investment approach. But I would say to start with a few really strong index funds.
Thank you.
Last question.
Hi, you talked for a while earlier about discrepancies between male and female roles in marital relationships. I'm wondering if there's any demographic data about women's roles in same-sex relationships among women in terms of financial role-playing and role-taking.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the bottom line is that one partner takes, generally the responsibility for the bill paying and that kind of thing, and the other partner takes responsibility for the investing. I think that can apply to same-sex marriages as well. And so I think my advice still applies, is make sure you have that, that communication back and forth. And every partnership, people have to decide, I think more now than ever, is with both spouses working, how are you going to handle the finances? Are you both going to put in the same amount of money, divide the household bills or not divide the household bills? I heard actually one really interesting thing yesterday. And it was a same-sex couple, said that they decided, because one made much more than the other, that they were actually going to take and put in a percentage of their income into a joint pool, which I thought was a really interesting approach. So I think that the issues are all the same, and I think it's just a matter of having the communication and the conversation about how you're going to handle it.
I do know, though, in some of the materials that we have on your table, especially the UBS report, there's information about same-sex couples that they did interview about their behaviors within the study as well. So you can see in that report the...
Own your worth.
Yeah, own your worth. Thank you. It does talk in there about that. So You can see some of the data on there. All right. So now it's your turn to talk with each other. So you've been assigned topics. I'm going to turn it over to our partner, Sheila Doherty, to talk. And thank you very much, Sheila. This has been fabulous.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks, Terry, and thanks so much, Sheila, for all your expertise. I think we're all going to have some talks with our significant others when we get home tonight. So if any of you have ever been in the Career Center for a coaching experience or through the halls of Alumni Relations, you've probably heard us talk about the power of the Nova Network. And what excites me the most is things like this, because this is the power of the Nova Network. So I hope you'll take the next 15 to 20 minutes, ask questions. As Terry mentioned, you're strategically placed across lots of experience levels and lots of other demographics so that you can purposefully share and ask questions and share some ideas with each other. You might surprise yourselves with what you already know that you can share with someone else that they didn't know.